Good evening, everyone. We are now at the end of our study in the book of Zechariah. We have arrived in chapter 14. One word of caution that I would like to bring out as we have studied this book is that it is at the very tail end of a series of revelation that is at the post-exilic period where they have come back to Jerusalem and is attempting to rebuild the temple. The number of passages are numerous and is a little few verses here and there that shows prophetic utterances of things that's going to happen in the near future at the time of Zechariah, as well as some further down distant, even distant from us. One of the challenges that people will have looking at such passages in Zechariah is that there are a lot of things that is not so straightforward. There are a number of things that is obscure. And in so doing, most people will feel that as the time draws nearer, then things will be clearer. What we can glean are just what we will call the framework, the general idea, but not the details of it. And because of that, I would like to remind all of us that in our study, we are not going into any great length of explanation, but essentially just to provide some understanding of what the text is actually saying, and what more can be gleaned. Now, in chapter 14 is the end of a long book of prophecies, because there are so many in this book. And I have also highlighted to you that one of the main prophecies is with regards to the Ezekiel 38 and 39 war. And you have Gog and Magog, and they will come down from the north and they will attack Israel, or the land of Israel. And in the midst of the land of Israel will be Jerusalem. And so often we have seen the prophecies talking about Gog and Magog coming down, going in, and then conquering the land. And the final phase would be to be coming against Jerusalem. And this is what we will be seeing in chapter 14. It is the last phase of it. And we begin by reading verse 1. It says, "Behold, look, a day is coming for the Lord." So this is the phrase, a day is coming for Jehovah, when the spoils you will be divided among you. Now, this idea comes two ways. This will be an idea of that Israel will be victorious. And Israel will be victorious. And it's stated up in verse 1, mainly to tell us this is the end summary of the chapter. This day will come when God will enable you to divide spoils. Spoils is actually the what we call the spoils of war. And Israel is seen to be victorious. That's why they divide the spoils of war. But before that happens, verse 2 onwards describe a number of events that will have to happen before they can be victorious. They have first got to understand in verse 2, God says, "I will gather all the nations against Jerusalem to battle. And so you have to win this battle in order for verse 1 to take place. Now, the second thing I want you all to understand is that much of all the prophecies are written in a poetic language. Now, a poetic language means that it is not didactic. It uses poetry language to express the visions and the prophecies, such that there are times when things are not so clear. But nevertheless, the general purpose can be gleaned, and that's what we will discuss. Against Jerusalem, and the city will be taken. That's Jerusalem. The houses plundered, the women raped, half of the city exiled, taken out of the city, but the rest of the people will not be eliminated from the city. So there will be a time where half is outside and half is inside. That's the vision. Exactly how that takes place, we are not really told. But we are told that all the nations, and we talk about all the nations, this would be the goyim. When it says goyim, this will be the non-Hebrew nations. And that would be everybody else against Israel herself. And in this case, at Jerusalem. So remember, we are now at this point. Verse 3 says this: Then the Lord will go forth and fight against those nations as when he fights on a day of battle. Now, we need to understand that this is a declaration. It's a declaration that this war is started by God because he will gather, and it will be fought by God. So you can see that we have two portions. It is initiated by God and it's fought by God. Who is this fighting against? It is against those nations. What is those nations? The goyim. So we are talking about Israel and the goyim. That will be everybody else. Now, in this case, we need to understand that in the poetic language as being described, God will gather all the nations to fight Jerusalem. God will also go forth and fight the battle. Now, what does that mean? In such a poetic language, it means that the end battle is very much stated in Ezekiel 38 and 39. If you go back and read these two chapters, you will find a lot of details that's there. And it is a battle that is God's battle, that the Israelites themselves are unable to defend themselves. And so it will be a time where God will start the war, which means that the timing, right? The timing is decided by God. And once the battle begins, Israel will be unable to defend herself, and you'll find some divine intervention. That's what verses 1, 2, and 3 is talking about. Just as God fights on the day of battle, for example, at a time when they cross the Red Sea, or Yam Suf, right? Yam Suf. That would be the Hebrew name for the sea. And they were at a time where they can't defend themselves. And so God fought Pharaoh on their behalf. So that's the reminder to Israel that in this final day, this will happen again. And God knows. And God will deal with the goyim. We find that as God goes for the battle, he goes forth and fights the battle with the goyim. He now describes what will happen at that battle. So you find that this is the declaration. This would be the how. Now, how would not be in detail, but it'll give you the general idea. So it says here, on that day, his feet, whose feet? This is important. It would be the Lord. As he goes to battle, the Lord is, in a poetic language anyways, his feet will stand on the Mount of Olives, which is in front of Jerusalem on the east, and the Mount of Olives will be split in its middle from the east to the west, creating a very large valley. Half of the mountain will move toward the north and the other half toward the south. Now let's understand this. It is important for us to understand the poetic language because you won't see God's feet, right? This is God's feet. If you can't see God, you won't see God's feet. And in a poetic language, every time you talk about God's feet, it is about the narrative of God causing something to happen. It is God in action. That would be the idea of talking about feet. In the Hebrew language, we see a lot of usage of body parts. And the body parts are metaphorical. For example, when we talk about the hand, it's about doing something. We talk about the right hand, it's about the authority, right? We talk about the heart, it's about the mind and the decisions. We talk about the kidney, we talk about the emotions. We talk about the eyes, it's about the watch, and so on and so forth. So the feet will be a description of walking and causing something to happen. And so in a poetic way, so understand this is a poetic narrative. We're not talking about God's actual foot. His feet will stand on the Mount of Olives. And this is an important aspect that we need to understand. This is how it works. We have Jerusalem, and then we have the Mount of Olives. And then in here, we have the Kidron Valley. This is east, this is west, north, and south. So this is a very important map that we have to bear in mind when we talk about verse 4. It says God is going to cause something which is in front. So Mount of Olives is in front. Now understand this. When we talk about in front in Hebrew, this idea is upon the face from the front, which is kedem. So this is usually the case. We have the face, and the face is always facing east. You must know that in Hebrew. And so Mount of Olives is at the front, which is in the face of Jerusalem. And so Mount of Olives is right here on the east side of Jerusalem. Then we are told that the Mount of Olives are split in two. And then it says here there is going to be a very large valley that's going to be created. And then half of the mountain will move to the north and half to the south. So this would be pictorially correct as a concept, So it's important for us then to understand this is something that's going to happen. And when this happens, there will be a major earthquake because of the split of the Mount of Olives, there will be a great earthquake. So just bear in mind that all of these is a picture that's been described that you have to be able to visualize and feel and appreciate what will happen when these actions are taking, because this is what God is doing. In verse 5, it says, and you will run away, escape by the valley of my mountains, for the valley of the mountains will reach Azel. Yes, you will flee as you fled from the earthquake in the days of Uzziah, the king of Judah. This would be in Amos. It is also at the time of Isaiah, where the pillars of the temple shook. Now, this is a historic moment, and this is a real earthquake. And it happened at a time when Uzziah decided to make an incense offering inside the temple, which is restricted only for the priest. And by that action, he was not stoppable. And God struck him literally dead with leprosy, that he cannot live amongst the living. He had to live amongst the dead. And that in itself is the reminder of that great earthquake. And they will run away everywhere, right? They will run away and they cry out. And the Lord my God will come, and all the holy ones with him. And this one is hard to understand. So how is the Lord Jehovah coming with the holy ones? So who are these holy ones with him? So a few very different and diverse explanation. One of them are the holy angels that will come. And since this is the final battle, it appears that this could be a very supernatural battle as well. Now, I'm just making these suggestions because I really don't have a concrete idea of who the Holy Ones is. And when he says God will come, it would not be physical, but in what form and shape, we don't know. Because on that day, there will be no light. It says here, what does that mean? The light will not be, and the luminaries will die out. Now, this is something that we need to understand. In verse 6, the light will not be, it won't say be no light. How would you say that? In that day, the light will be dim. On that day, the light will be dimmed. Will be dim. And so it says that the luminaries is going to be, this is, how should we say, it doesn't even say this at all. I'm sorry. The translation is giving us a lot of problem. It says the light will be dim and will be somewhat concealed, right? And concealed. Dim, basically saying about the same thing, right? Dim. Verse 7, for it will be a unique day which is known to the Lord. Now, this word unique day is something which is interpreted. In verse 7, the idea of unique day literally means it will be the one day. The one day. That special day. And it is actually translated from the word one day, Yom Echad. And it is a special day. Every time you see the word one, it is unique. It is typically telling us it is the day, the unique day. It is the one and only day. That would be the idea of the word one, right? And it is known to the Lord that God actually knows. But it is a time that is neither day nor night. But it will come about that at the time of evening when there is light. Now, what do you mean evening? Evening time, Erev, in the it says evening. It is a time when the sky is darkened, right? When the sky becomes dark. But it is not absolutely dark yet. There will still be some light. That is what it means. It is towards the evening. And on that day, same day, the one day here that we're talking about, the unique day, living waters will flow out of Jerusalem. Now, this is important for us to understand. What do you mean, living waters? Now, this is the actual word. Waters that is alive. Living waters. Waters that is alive. Now, the idea of living waters means that this is flowing water. And we read yesterday that there was a well, there was a fountain, there was a spring coming out from the ground. So flowing water is living water. As opposed to water in storage or in a cistern, in a jar. This is called dead water. And so when we talk about living water, in this case, living water, we are talking about flowing water. And this would be water that comes out from the spring, from the well that was there in chapter 13 yesterday. It will flow out of Jerusalem. And it says half of it towards the eastern sea and the other half toward the western sea. It will be in summer as well as in winter. And we're talking about the later part of the year. And when it's just later part, it will be the early rain and the late rain period, right? That would be in the summer, that would be around the June, July time frame. And in the winter, it would be before the Passover. So it's actually in a very warm period and also in a very cold period, and water will keep flowing. Now understand this, if this is Jerusalem, then we have the east and the west. So what do we see is that we have the Eastern Sea, and that will be the Dead Sea, or the Bible calls it the Salt Sea, or the Sea of Arava. In the west, this Western Sea would be the Mediterranean, or it's also called the Great Sea. And these are the two seas, and water is said to flow out both ways. Now, why does it say flow out? Because we need to realize that Jerusalem is some close to 800 meters above sea level. And so when it flows, it actually flows down. from Jerusalem. And the Dead Sea is a few hundred meters below sea level. So you find that there is a great disparity of height. And so water will naturally, when it comes up from the ground in Jerusalem, it will flow to both sides. And that's what is being described. Now, how much water, how great the water, is there going to be a big river, small river? We really are not told. In verse 9, and then it says, and then the Lord, and who is the Lord? This would be God himself. God himself will be king over all the, well, it's not the earth, will be all the land. Remember, we are talking about Gog and Magog coming in. It is not a worldwide war. It is a worldwide war at one particular location, and that would be at the promised land. And so God himself will be king for all the land of Israel. And on that day, what day? That unique day. And then it says, God will be, well, we don't have the only. God will be one. And his name is one, right? His name is one. So the idea of one is very, very important. On that one day, God will be one. And that in itself tells us that God is one is in a few understanding. One, there will be no other gods in the land. There will be no other names in the land. And so this itself tells us that God is the only one in both as God and as name. And those people who are there in those days will only see God and only talk about God. And that's the only name. That is how the word one literally means here. All the land will change into a plain from Gevah to Rimmon to the south of Jerusalem. Now, this word here, after we talk about the south of Jerusalem, and it says here, but Jerusalem will rise up and remain on its side from Benjamin's gate as far as the first gate to the corner gate, and from the tower of Hananel to the king's wine presses. Well, what does that mean? Not exactly sure. But essentially, it is giving us a boundary of a new Jerusalem. And perhaps when the time comes, we will have a better idea what all these locations may mean. After God fights the battle, it tells us the people will live in Jerusalem. There will no longer be a curse. Now, what does that mean? There will no longer be, I guess you won't call it a curse. There won't be a haram, right? A haram, we should say that this is it will no longer be a non-devoted place. I think that would be a better thing to say. It will not be a place that is rejected, okay? Not devoted. So no longer be a curse, no longer be non-devoted. So it will be right the opposite. It will be a dedicated place for God. And Jerusalem will live in security. Now understand this. The idea of security means confidence. It is the same word Trust in the Lord with all your heart. That's the idea. Have confidence. This will be confidence. Why? Because God fought and there is victory. And this victory is permanent. That is what this word would mean. They would live in permanent peace of confidence. Now, in verse 12, it describes how God is going to deal with the nations. The verse 12 tells us that this is what God will do. This will be the plague with which God will strike, right? All the peoples, and in this case, this will be the nations who has gone to war against Jerusalem. And it describes something which is hard to imagine. The plague. What is it that God will strike them with? And this is something that will hurt them, something that will harm them. And it says here, their flesh will rot while they stand on their feet. Their eyes will rot in their sockets, and their tongue will rot in their mouth. Now, it is hard to imagine what this is. Now, I have read that some people try to equate this with a nuclear effect. I'm just going to leave it here for your thinking. I'm not going to talk much about it, but could this be an effect where people will die and decay while they are standing up? I'm not quite sure. So I am just leaving it for information. And so, as what many people will say, when time comes, you'll probably see a lot more understanding of some of these words. Verse 13, it says, and it will come about on that day that a great panic, confusion, of the Lord, God will bring a confusion and fall on them, the nations who came to war against Jerusalem. So the nations, and they will seize each other's hand, and the hand of one will be raised against the other. So all of them appears to fight with each other, not knowing what happened, and this is the confusion. How did that happen? I really don't know. But it says here, God will going to cause this panic and they will fight each other. And moreover, so it tells us something even more shocking. In verse 14, Judah will also fight at Jerusalem. Judah would be the rest of Judah might be forced against Jerusalem. But we don't really know, right, exactly how this would pan out. But the literalness of the text appears to say that there is such an event happening. And then the wealth of all the surrounding nations, and in this case, very specifically, the goyim, will be gathered, gold, silver garments in great abundance. And remember, this is in chapter 14, verse 1, the booty, right? The booty, the spoils of war will be all these things. The wealth, gold, silver, garment in great abundance, lots of it. And then we will see, and similarly, its continuation, that this plague, there will be a plague on the horse, the mule, the camel, the donkey, and all the cattle in those camps. It is talking about an ancient warfare, of course, when Gog and Magog or Magog comes down from the north into Israel and then to Jerusalem with their animals, and all their animals will be struck as well. So we're talking about a plague that is affecting the soldiers, and that will also affect their animals. And I think you can think of it that way, that this is going to be a two-pronged attack by God. Then it will come about that any who are left of all the nations, now nations here, this would be goyim, whoever did not die, those who came against Jerusalem. What's going to happen is this. Remember, God fights this war. And so in the course of this war, people can see, the goyim can see, what is God doing. Now, this is an important concept because those who are left, who did not die, they will go up, and you notice this idea here, they will go up from year to year to worship the King, the Lord of hosts, and celebrate Sukkot. And this will be in the 7th month, right? Sometime in September, October, each year. And so what does that mean? It means that the goyim will recognize. Now, this word worship is cause to bow, cause themselves to bow, prostrate. So understand this, there is no such word called worship. This is literally the ancient Near East posture of prostrating. And this is generally termed as worship. They bow down like this to anyone who is greater than them. And the goyim will now bow down to Jehovah. And they will seek his face. And God says there is a new law. The new law is for the goyim to observe Sukkot. Now, what is Sukkot? Sukkot is the Feast of Tabernacles. And we need to understand that the Feast of Tabernacles is called the Feast of Booths. And it works this way. The whole concept of the Feast of Booths is that they actually have very flimsy structure, and it's covered with leaves, right? It's covered with leaves. These are not strong structures, but they are covered with leaves. So I'll draw some palm leaves there. And they will stay in the booths. And what this actually means is that all this flimsiness of the structure of the Sukkot, which is the tent, right, which is the tent, is a fact of dependence on God. In the time of the wilderness, they learned about the tent of God over them. And so somehow the goyim are expected to celebrate the feast of Sukkot as well in that day, when they have realized that God is a true God, and they will come to Jerusalem. Now, this flows into Isaiah chapter 2, right? In verse 2 as well. And it will be that whichever of the families of the land does not go up to Jerusalem to bow down, not worship, right? To bow down to the king. And who is the king? And that would be God himself. He will be in his temple, Jehovah Tsevaot. There will be no rain on them. Now understand this. Why is rain so important? This is actually taught in the book of Leviticus. That in the land of Israel, they have to have obedience to see rain. Right? They have to have obedience to see rain. When there is no rain, they have to look at themselves to repent to God, and God will send them rain. So rain is important in the land, the promised land. Verse 18, and it goes on to say, the family of Egypt does not go up to Jerusalem, then no rain will be on them. It will be the plague with which the Lord strikes the nations. It says here, that do not go up to celebrate Sukkot. Now, verse 18 says, God is going to strike them, and the nations would be the goyim, and this would be a new law. It is not there today, but it will be in that day, that unique day where God will bring about victory in Jerusalem. And again, this will be the punishment of Egypt and the punishment of all the nations that do not go up to celebrate the Feast of Booths. This is for the goyim, right? For the goyim, right here. And that would be the plague. No rain, right? No rain. And so when you see no rain, and when they see no rain in those days, they can see that God is the commander of the weather. And hence, they see God as the creator of the world. Now, in verse 20 and 21, our last two verses, again, it describes another scenario. On that day, there will be inscribed on the bells of the horses. And it says here, holy unto God. And the pots in the Lord's house will be like bowls before the altar. Every cooking pot in Jerusalem and in Judah will be holy to the Lord of hosts. All who sacrifice will come and take them and boil in them, and they will be no longer. Now, this word is not a Canaanite. Okay? This is not a Canaanite. In verse 21, this verse should be a trader. The word is a trader or a merchant. To convert any transactions, to make it a clean transaction, all we say that in the house of God on that day, there will be so much to offer. That is what verses 20 and 21 does. And this is with regards to the assumption that there is a temple in Jerusalem. It doesn't say, but it implies that because of all these offerings in the Lord's house, which is the temple, and there will be so many offerings in the bowls, there will be not enough people to make the sacrifices for these people. And every cooking pot will be used to make offerings. That's the picture here. And so the book of Zechariah ends on a high note that not only God will divide the spoils of the victory, that God will be in his temple, right? In the temple. And there will be a lot to offer up. And there will be a lot of people coming. Then there will be the goyim, and there will be the Jews. And this will reflect Isaiah chapter 2, verses 1 to 4. Now, that would be the final picture of the book of Zechariah. Now, there were a lot of details that I really don't know how to explain, but in general, you get the picture. The framework is that it will be a glorious end in verses 20 and 21, that God is on his throne in the temple. There will be lots of goyim, the non-Jews and the Jews alike will be there. Now, that's the verse, the Hebrew is saying that, and it maps very closely to Isaiah chapter 2, verses 1 to 4. And with this, we come to the end of our study in the book of Zechariah. We won't be doing a reflection, but suffice to say that we've tried to uncover as much of the Hebrew, but as I had mentioned at the beginning of this session, there will be lots of details that we would not be able to understand until the day draws near to give us a better understanding of what is actually happening. And so what we tried to do was to give the grammar, the language, and the gist of what is being said. And with this, we come to the end of our study in the book of Zechariah.